Our last presentation of the session is Dr. Dustin Boler. Welcome, Dustin. He is going to give a presentation on evaluation of ATP bioluminescence for improved biosecurity in the swine industry. Dustin is the Director of Research for Carthage Innovative Swine Solutions. He has over 15 years of professional research experience, both in academia as well as private industry. And Carthage Innovative Swine Solutions conducts independent, contracted research for swine nutrition, health, and technology companies. Thank you so much, Dustin. Welcome.
So good morning, everybody. Much appreciate the opportunity. Like our previous speakers, it's a real privilege to be here. I've been fortunate enough to attend a number of Leman conferences in the past, but this is the first opportunity I've had to speak, and so I greatly appreciate the invitation and the opportunity. Both of the trials that I'm going to talk about today were funded by SHIC, and so certainly want to thank them for the support of our research program as well. Because this is a transport seminar, I'm going to focus on the first project that we completed, which is our trailer wash project, but we've also done this a second time where we focused on farrowing room cleanliness as well. Both of these research projects have been published in Translational Animal Science. You have the QR code there. As I mentioned, I'm going to focus on the trailer wash project largely today. But as I say that, the farrowing room trial is actually really interesting, and in some of our assessments and internal discussions may be a better opportunity for the overall adoption of the technology, and we'll talk about why that may or may not be true moving forward. I'd also like to thank our collaborators, and I'll thank them again at the end, but Neogen and Charm Sciences both provided the luminometers that we evaluated in this project, as well as the swabs, and so very, very appreciative to all of our partners as we're going through this. So when we start at the very beginning, the question becomes, what is bioluminescence? And so I'll explain that, and then I'll remind you that innovation doesn't necessarily mean new. And so the idea of ATP evaluation or the use of ATP detection to assess cleanliness has been used for a long time. And we actually had an article published by National Hog Farmer a few weeks ago, and then someone commented on it that they remember evaluating these technologies a number of years ago. And so right now, this technology is used in the food industry and it's used in hospitals. And so we felt like if it's good enough to detect and determine cleanliness in those applications, certainly it should be good enough to at least evaluate, can we use it to determine our trailers, are they clean, or our farrowing rooms, are they clean after a weaning event? So bioluminescence is an enzymatic reaction, and so if we add a known amount of luciferin to a known amount of luciferase in the presence of oxygen, we can use those known amounts then to quantify ATP and determine our cleanliness as a proxy in that regard. And so if you think about it in terms of a lightning bug uses this exact same enzymatic process, and a lightning bug will illuminate or glow with the presence of luciferin and luciferase in the presence of ATP. The greater the intensity of that illumination, the more ATP is present. And so that's actually what we're going to quantify here, is the intensity of the illumination, being that more ATP should bring a greater intensity of light. And we're going to quantify that through a unitless measure of what we call relative light units. And then we're going to convert those RLUs and try to apply them in a way that can be useful to folks on farm. And so our objectives, we had really 3 objectives, but kind of 4. And both of these are applicable regardless if we're talking about from a trailer wash or from a farrowing room. But our 3 objectives were first to identify areas in a pig production that are most likely responsible for disease transmission. So if we think about the trailer wash project, that is, where are we not getting our livestock trailers clean if in fact we're not getting them clean? If that's in a farrowing room, where is it in the farrowing room, specifically in the farrowing crates, that we're not getting those crates clean? Then we wanted to correlate ATP bioluminescence to either APC or a coliform plate counts. Again, if those don't correlate, then it's unlikely that the technology is effective. And so our whole objective here is, can we use ATP bioluminescence as a tool to determine cleanliness? And then lastly, to determine which of those locations on the farm are most accessible and indicative of our cleaning protocols if we're going to adopt this technology. Our methodologies were very, very similar, whether we used them at the trailer wash. We refined them slightly in the farrowing room. As you do always in research trials, we learned a few things in our first iteration that we tried to improve upon in our second. But for the trailer wash, we swab trailers at 2 different trailer wash stations. Carthage, we have what we call the dirty wash, and then we have the clean wash. And at the dirty wash, that would be the site where we wash trailers from pigs that either market pigs, cull sows, or sites that we know that hauled PRRS or PEDV positive pigs. Our clean wash is the opposite, so that is the site where we would evaluate or wash trailers from replacement breeding animals or high health wean pigs. So we evaluated 50 trailers at each of those 2 trailer wash. In our trailer wash project, we evaluated 2 different bioluminometers. The farrowing room, we added a third, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. We evaluated 5 locations in each trailer when those 5 locations were available, and I'll talk about some of the learnings and the findings and frustrations of these type of research trials. We had 409 ATP swabs, and so if you do that math, you'll quickly realize that doesn't compute. 100 trailers, 5 locations, 409, there's something missing there, and I'll explain that. Then we had 208 environmental swabs. In our farrowing room, it was a similar setup. We washed rooms. All of those rooms, that sow farm was positive for rotavirus. We swabbed 105 crates and the doorways of 21 rooms. So we swabbed 21 farrowing rooms, and then we swabbed 5 crates within each of those. Same 2 bioluminescents that we used in the trailer wash plus the third. 5 locations, as I mentioned, 545 total ATP swabs, 305 environmental swabs. So our first objective was we needed locations that were accessible from outside of what we were swabbing. So trailer wash locations that we could gain access from the outside of the trailer without the need to get into the trailer. Farrowing rooms, same thing. We needed locations that were available and accessible from outside of the farrowing crate without getting into the farrowing crate. What we suspected and later confirmed is that we can do a nice job of cleaning livestock trailers or farrowing rooms, and if we're not careful and we're climbing back in those facilities afterwards, foot traffic can recontaminate and undo all of our hard work. And so that was the first criteria, and you can see here pictures on the left of what those trailer wash swabs look like, and a picture on the right is what it might look like swabbing a sow feeder. So our 5 trailer wash candidate locations were the nose access door, back door flush gate, rear side access door, the belly flush gate, and the belly side access door. If you want to know how we decided on those 5, frankly, those were our 5 access points. There wasn't a whole lot of effort that really went into those as we started going through it. Initially, we did swab all kinds of things. We swabbed latches, we swabbed hinges, we swabbed locks, all of those kinds of things. But again, each of those violated our original objective, is we've got to have something that's accessible from the outside, and it's got to be easily accessible. Otherwise, the wash staff's simply not going to use the technology, and that's not going to do anyone any good. Farrowing room locations were a little bit different. We did actually have quite a bit of discussion and some lively discussion about where to evaluate those and what was most appropriate. Where we ultimately landed is within each of those crates, the sow feeder, and we need to be probably pretty specific about where on the sow feeder. We actually measured the pan. We've had some conversations in other places about perhaps we should have evaluated underneath the pan or around the lip. I'm not sure it would have changed our results, but certainly there is some caveats there on what that might look like. The crate sorting bars, the crate, the back of the wall of the sow crate in a corner, and then we evaluated the pig floor mat. And one of our collaborators was adamant they wanted to understand what that foot traffic was doing in terms of moving around, and so we did measure the entryway of each of those 21 rooms. So from here, environmental swabbing, Dr. Welch is in the room. He did all of our environmental evaluations for both projects, and so I'll show you the methods, but any specific details need to be directed to him. We followed his lead. He was certainly the expert on the project and a co-investigator for both of these 2 trials. But essentially, we swabbed a 100 square centimeter area. We quantified those for APCs on the trailer wash project, and then specifically for colony forming units on the farrowing room trial. So for a number of observations, and as I mentioned earlier when we were talking about the methodology, the amount of ATP swabs we had specifically on the farrowing room trial does not equate to the 5 locations and the 100 trailers. That's because we quickly learned that unfortunately most of the nose access locations in a livestock trailer don't exist. And so we had hoped to evaluate the nose of each of those trailers, but in fact in our data set, what we had access to, only 15 of the 100 that we evaluated actually had nose access doors. You'll see in just a second why that's pretty frustrating, but nonetheless you can't measure what you don't have access to, so we had those 15 swabs, and we'll talk about what we do with those data. Likewise, only 94 of the 100 trailers had backdoor flush gates, but all 100 had rear side access doors, belly flush gates, and then belly side access doors. And so really we had 5 locations that were our candidates. We very quickly narrowed that down to only 4 because, again, if we don't have access to the nose, there's not much value in encouraging people to measure that location. So what we're looking at here is these are log transformed RLUs, and so remember those RLUs are a unitless relative light unit that we are essentially correlating each of our 2 luminometers in this technology. And so what I want you to look at here is not to focus on the correlation. It is a correlation that would be considerably moderately strong. But what I actually am presenting these for is for the reminder that all of these technologies or all these luminometers are measuring the same thing, but they're doing it quite differently. And so if you're adopting this technology or you have access to one of these luminometers over the other, that it's very important where we're headed in this conversation is we're going to determine some SPC critical limits on actually how to adopt these technologies and use them on the farm. And so it's important to remember what luminometer you're using because we know that the way that they're evaluating those RLUs is different and it's going to differ with every location. And so this is more of a reminder that we need to individually evaluate our candidate locations with the luminometers that we have because they do correlate. They do tell us the same thing, that as contamination increases, we're going to get an increase in RLUs, but they're telling us those same things in a different way. So as we look at this, we're going to first look at our environmental swabs, again, of each of those 4 locations. And as I mentioned, only 15 of the 100 trailers we evaluated actually had nose access doors. And where that becomes unfortunate is because the nose was actually, in our data set, on both trailer washes, the dirtiest, or essentially had the highest colony forming units of the 5 locations. Next to that was our backdoor flush gate, and you can see on and down and from there. And so we did actually have differences in cleanliness levels of those livestock trailers, and it appears that the front and the back might be the most dirty or the most opportunities where our cleaning procedures are failing. Certainly are doing much a better job around the belly and in areas, flat surfaces where we can get a lot of water, less crevices, all of those type of things. So we have that information. Now we kind of have some understanding of where our contamination might be. The question then becomes, can the luminometer tell us the same information? And so as we look at those 2 luminometers and we look at the rank orders of the locations, we were quite encouraged that, again, both luminometers identified the nose access door as being the highest RLUs and the backdoor flush gate being our second highest. By this point, we had largely already eliminated that the nose access door is simply not going to be an option. There's just not enough trailers that have that nose access door, and so then we very quickly focused our efforts on the backdoor flush gate as our potential candidate spot for 2 reasons. One, you only have essentially arm reach access, and so you don't have the risk of someone climbing in the trailer, carrying in the foot traffic. They can reach in, they can do their swabs, and get their information. Again, at this point, we're very encouraged because the rank order of what we were seeing from our APC counts matched what both luminometers were showing us, and we were seeing statistical differences to give us some confidence that these luminometers and the technology may be a viable option. So as we look at the log linear association, so these are the correlations of each of those 2 units, and so this is where I started my talk in saying that we evaluated the trailer wash and we have some information, and we evaluated the farrowing rooms. And so at this point in the conversation, you'll see those correlations are weak to moderate, and so This is where ATP technology is beneficial and is effective, and I'll show you what I mean by that. But I think what this means is that at least in the Carthage system, our protocols are doing a pretty decent job of cleaning our livestock trailers. That's not at all to mention that there's not opportunities for improvement and there's not ways to improve and that there's not reasons to monitor those. I'm saying I think they do a pretty good job of cleaning our trailer wash. That is not the case on the farrowing room. And so whenever you look at these correlations in our farrowing room trial, those correlations are much, much stronger. I think we have a much greater opportunity to provide some tools to the wash crews in our farrowing rooms that we might in our trailer wash, at least within the Carthage system. So what we did is now we have RLUs that we need to take those information and we need to synthesize them into a tool or into something that can be used on the farm. Because again, what we're hoping here is that we have a real-time tool that can provide wash crews feedback on have they achieved their objectives of cleaning either a livestock trailer or a farrowing room. And so what we did is we took those RLUs and we essentially built statistical process control X-bar charts. Well, what we noticed is in those RLUs, there's a tremendous amount of variation. And so to artificially reduce our standard deviation, we used the interquartile range. And so we reduced the values just using our interquartile range, recalculated our standard deviation, and built our critical limits based on 3 standard deviations from that reduced interquartile range. Otherwise, we essentially had no trailers or farrowing rooms, farrowing crates that failed. And so you can see what those look like, the original 3 standard deviation RLU threshold versus our adjusted. Again, this becomes a risk management tool, and so you can adjust that however you choose. If you wanted to do 3 standard deviations, 2.5 standard deviations, these are a tool to manage risk. And so we turned those into X-bar SPC charts, as I mentioned. We set our critical limits at 3 standard deviations. In this particular example that we're looking at the 3M clean trace luminometer at that backdoor flush gate, because that's where we had identified the greatest opportunities to use this technology to identify livestock trailers that weren't as clean as they needed to be. And so we set our standard critical limit at that point. We set them using log transform data, but the outputs that the farm crew are going to use are those RLUs, and so you can convert that y-axis back to your RLU so that they can read those data in real time. If you would look at the 94 trailers that we evaluated, 14 of them would have failed, and so at that particular case, 14 of the 94 trailers that we would evaluated would have need to be rewashed. Again, this becomes a risk management. If that's too many because those trailers are going somewhere that you know you're going to pick up disease-challenged animals or whatnot, then maybe you can adjust those RLUs, you can adjust those critical limits such that you have your failure rate relatively in line where you want it to be from a statistical standpoint to make economic decisions. We did the exact same thing if we look at our sow crate or our farrowing rooms. The sow crate sorting bars and the sow feeders were our 2 areas of greatest contamination. We went through the exact same process of determining our critical limits. We did that for all 3 luminometers in our farrowing room crate. The same exercises. In that particular case, on those sorting bars, we would have had 12 of 105 of the crates that we washed would have failed, and those would have need to have been rewashed. And so it does 2 things. One, that as we started through this trial, the farm crew production folks were asking us and said, you're not going to have any of these crates fail because now you're bringing attention to those farrowing crates. The wash crews are going to do a better job. It's great, right? If that's in fact the case and your wash crews are doing a better job focusing on those critical areas, that's fantastic. Unfortunately, that wasn't really the case here, right? Those guys, over time, if you do enough of these, are going to lull back into some old habits. Nonetheless, now we have critical limits that provides them immediate feedback. Are your wash protocols effective, or are they drifting? Are we over time? If you think about employee turnover, or you have new wash crews, you rotate people in and out. Are they just as effective as the old wash crews? Are people cutting corners? All of those kinds of things. Again, I'll say it ad nauseum, this is simply a risk management tool. And so, just to tidy up here, does it work? Can bioluminescence be used to determine livestock trailer or farrowing room cleanliness? And so in our samples that we evaluated, even though it wasn't a direct relation or a direct objective of the trial, all of the trailers that we evaluated, that's 50 of them in our dirty wash, were negative for PED. We did not quantify whether they were positive for PED when they arrived, and so it's unlikely but possible all 50 of them were carrying fecal material that were PED positive. It's equally as unlikely and possible that none of them were carrying PED, but when we sampled them afterwards, none of our livestock trailers, those 50 that we evaluated, were positive for PED, again providing us some level of comfort that our trailer wash SOPs are relatively effective. Cleaning procedures, as I mentioned, appear to be effective. We had moderate correlations between luminometers, and so that again is a reminder the luminometers are telling you the same thing, that as we increase surface contamination, we're increasing RLUs, but it's also a reminder to remember that when you're building your critical limits, those critical limits need to be site-specific and they need to be luminometer-specific because they are quantifying those RLUs in a little different way. We did have positive correlations between APCs and ATPs at both the trailer wash. I didn't show the data here, but those correlations were much, much stronger on the farrowing room trial. That makes perfect sense, right? As you get greater variation in your cleaning procedures, you have more crates that are essentially visibly dirty. That makes it much easier to detect those relationships. So that's not surprising. But I think it also reiterates the fact that we've got greater opportunities to improve our cleaning procedures on the farrowing rooms than we do in the trailers. Nose access door was our dirtiest area, but again, there was only 15 of the 100 trailers that we evaluated had nose access doors. So if you have them and you're aware that all of your trailers in your site have nose access doors, it's still a viable place to look and certainly an opportunity for us, but we have discounted it because not enough of our livestock trailers have nose access doors. And so again, it's a risk management tool. Not exactly sure if we can tell if the trailer is clean, but we for sure can tell when it's dirty, even when it's clean enough that there's no longer any visual contamination. So again, I'd like to thank SCHC for the opportunity for supporting us on these trials. It's been a great opportunity for us. We've really enjoyed it. Certainly like to thank both of our collaborators, Neogen and Charm Sciences, and I always want to thank Dr. Dave Pyburn because he was one of the original scientists that brought this idea to us, and so he's the one that got all this started. Very much appreciate to him. Thank you, Dr. Niederwerder. With that, I'd love to take any questions.
Thank you, Dustin. Great talk and another tool for our toolbox for sure. Any questions for Dustin?
Lunchtime.
Hello, good morning. Thank you for the presentation. It was very good. I'm Giselle Guzman from the Philippines. I just wanted to ask if you were able to associate those failed trailer washes to a particular truck wash facility and what possibly they're doing wrong on those facilities.
That's a good question. We didn't look at it that specifically. We could very easily go back and track which of those 15 trailers failed. I don't have that information off the top of my head, but I could get it pretty easily. I'd have to go look. That's a good question. I haven't thought of it that way. One thing I'll add to that that's kind of similar, I think, to what you're asking is, particularly on the farrowing room trailer, we evaluated all 3 luminometers, and we calculated critical limits for all 3 of those luminometers on all 5 of those locations. And it was interesting that the fail rate at each of those 5 locations was pretty similar, but the crates that they identified as fails differed just a little bit. All 3 luminometers identified the really dirty ones, but those that were kind of on the fringe, some of the luminometers failed and some passed, and those were a little more discrepancy in those that were on the cusp than what we had maybe anticipated or hoped. That doesn't answer your question, but it's more food for thought that just popped into my head.
Thanks for your talk. Do you have any information on how does water quality affect your luminometer results? Do you have, or do you know the water quality difference between truck washes?
Yep, and so in the trailer wash, the water quality would have been very, very similar. What I would encourage you is if you have access to those luminometers, I would reach out to the manufacturers. There are some minerals and different contaminants in your water that will impede that bioluminescent reaction. And so I don't know all those specifically. Those are certainly better questions for either Neogen or Charm. But to answer your question, the water source in the 2 trailer washes was the same. And we didn't test that necessarily specifically for the project. We do water analysis to know what our water contaminants are for all of our processes.
Thank you again to Dustin and to all of our speakers here today. Thank you for your attention during this session. Please, if you have any additional questions for any of the investigators, seek them out during lunch or during the rest of the meeting, and enjoy the rest of your Leman conference. Thanks so much.